I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I love you so much. My name is Karen Mitchell. I'm 68 years old, and I'm about to tell you how a funeral, a will, and a man I hadn't spoken to in 26 years completely turned my world upside down. The walls of the lawyer's office were lined with leather-bound books, some legal, most decorative. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting a warm glow across the polished oak desk. My son Daniel sat beside me with a smug smile, leaning close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne and see his gold cufflinks gleaming under the light. "You gave up your rights the day you walked out. Mom," he whispered, "don't expect a dime from Dad's will." I didn't answer. I just looked straight ahead at the lawyer. Mr. Samuel Morgan, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes behind round glasses. He gave a small, almost amused smile. Then he cleared his throat. "You might want to stay for this," he said. I didn't blink, just folded my hands in my lap, still in the same place they'd been since I walked in 10 minutes earlier, 2 weeks before. I had been kneeling in my small garden, pulling weeds from around my tomato plants when the phone rang. I live in a rented duplex outside of Westville, near the Smoky Mountains. It's cozy and quiet, just woods, a gravel road, and a creek that floods when it rains. Simple, but it's home. I almost didn't answer the call. In my experience, unexpected calls usually bring telemarketers or wrong numbers. But something, perhaps that sixth sense we develop as we age, made me brush the dirt from my hands and reach for the phone. "Is this Karen Mitchell?" a woman asked. "Yes, speaking. My name is Shauna. I'm calling on behalf of the Mitchell estate." That stopped me cold. I sank onto my porch steps, the afternoon sun warm on my shoulders, my heart suddenly racing like I'd run up a hill. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely steady. "Did you say estate?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Samuel Mitchell passed away on March 6th. You're listed as a named individual in the execution of his will." I didn't say anything right away. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Samuel gone. A man who had once been the center of my universe was no longer in this world. I hadn't spoken his name out loud in years, not since Daniel's college graduation when I'd murmured, "Your father will be there too," half under my breath. "I'm sorry for your loss," she added. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you," I managed to say, surprised at the genuine grief that washed over me. Despite everything, despite the years and hurt, there was still grief. The conversation was brief. She told me where and when the reading would be held, and that it was important I attend. I asked her twice if she was sure it wasn't a mistake. "No, ma'am. You were listed personally by Mr. Mitchell." When I hung up, I sat there a long time, watching the garden hose drip into the soil as the sun began its descent behind the trees. I thought of Samuel as he was when we first met, young, vibrant, filled with music and dreams. I thought of him as he became ambitious, distant, cold, and now he was neither, just gone. I hadn't seen him since 1999. That was the day I packed my car and drove away with 2 boxes of clothes, a cracked microwave, and our son's birth certificate in a folder on the front seat. The day I chose my dignity over a hollow marriage. The divorce wasn't friendly. It wasn't clean. We dragged each other through court like we were strangers fighting over a parking spot. But deep down, I think we both knew it was a long time coming. After the call, I went inside and made myself a cup of tea, the way my mother taught me, strong enough to stand a spoon in it, with just a touch of honey. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the old wooden box on my bookshelf. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were a few photographs, our marriage certificate, and some letters from the early days. There was one picture of Samuel at the piano, head tilted back, eyes closed, fingers splayed across the keys. He looked so alive then, so connected to something beyond himself. As I was putting the box away, a folded newspaper clipping fell out. I didn't remember saving it. The article was dated 2015, almost 10 years ago. The headline read, Anonymous Donor Fund's $2 million music program in Asheville schools. There was a quote from the school superintendent thanking the generous benefactor who insisted on remaining unnamed. What caught my eye was the small photo accompanying the article. It showed students playing in a new music room, and in the background, barely visible through a window, was a man watching. Even from that distance, I recognized Samuel's profile. He was older, grayer, but it was him. I'd never seen this article before, never knew he'd done this. I folded the clipping and put it back in the box, wondering what else I didn't know about the man I'd once shared my life with. My days now are usually simple. I water my tomatoes in the morning while listening to the birds, cardinals, and chickadees mostly. Sometimes I sit on the porch with my neighbor Nora, who's 82, and remembers when rotary phones were high-tech. We trade newspaper clippings and compare which joints are aching that day. Most Sundays I walk to the little Baptist church at the end of the road. Not because I'm especially religious, but because I like the music, the old pews worn smooth by generations, and the way Pastor Jim says everyone's name when they walk in as if we all matter. But in the days after that call, nothing felt simple anymore. I found myself thinking about Samuel more than I had in years, about who he'd become after I left, about the man who would name me in his will after 26 years of silence, the morning of the funeral. I stood in front of my closet wondering what to wear. Not the black dress I'd worn to my sister's funeral, too somber for a man who'd been out of my life for decades. I settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought on sale last year, but never worn. Not black. I wasn't performing grief, but respectful enough. I drove the 2 hours to Asheville with the radio off, just the sound of the road beneath my tires and my thoughts keeping me company. What was I doing? What did I expect to find? I wasn't going for closure that had come years ago, or so I'd thought. Maybe I just needed to see for myself that this chapter was finally, truly over. The chapel sat on a hill overlooking the city. Long driveway, stone walls, white pillars clean and cold like money always is. The kind of place where you don't raise your voice and you don't show your shoes if they aren't polished. I parked my car near the back, away from the black SUVs and luxury sedans. Mine was the only one with a cracked bumper and a cloth seat cover I'd sewn myself from an old quilt practical. Like me. I walked in alone. The place was full. Almost every pew taken. Men in dark suits, women in heels and pearl earrings. Phones tucked into handbags but never fully turned off. Some looked up when I walked down the side aisle. I saw recognition in a few eyes, those from the old days. People who knew me when I stood beside Samuel before he grew into someone people watched from a distance. Their faces didn't soften. They turned back to their programs, dismissing me as easily as turning a page. I found an open seat near the back, settling in quietly. At the front, Samuel's photo was framed in silver. He looked younger in it, maybe 50, smiling, just enough to seem approachable, but not so much that you'd think he was soft. That was how he built his image-controlled warmth. Even now, in death, he was selling something. I didn't cry. I'd done all that crying years ago in kitchens and parking lots and motel rooms. This was just another stop on a long road I never expected to travel again. The service began. A few speakers came up, his business partner, a longtime employee, someone from the city council. They talked about growth and vision, about how he'd come from little and built something big. They said things like strategic mind and unshakable discipline. No one mentioned music. No one mentioned the young man who could play piano for hours, lost in jazz riffs and melodies only he could hear. Then Daniel walked to the podium. My son. He looked like he belonged up there. Sharp suit, straight back, calm face. His voice carried through the room with the confidence of a man used to attention. My father was the kind of man who saw opportunity where others saw walls, he said. He wasn't just building a business. He was building a legacy. He spoke for almost 10 minutes, all of it clean and professional. He mentioned values, determination, hard work. He thanked the crowd for believing in his father's vision. He didn't mention family. He didn't say anything about me. He didn't mention how his father used to hold him on his lap at the piano, guiding his tiny fingers over the keys. I didn't expect him to. that Daniel was gone, replaced by this polished stranger who spoke in sound bites. When he finished, the crowd clapped softly, the kind of clapping that says, "We approve without needing to feel it." I kept my hands in my lap. After the service, I stood off to the side as people filed out. I didn't approach anyone. I didn't offer stories or condolences. I was just there, like a ghost visiting a life I once inhabited. A woman about my age approached, wearing an expensive black dress that somehow managed to look both formal and fashionable. Her hair was silver, cut in a stylish bob, and her makeup was subtle but perfect. I recognized her immediately, Eliza Ross, Samuel's younger sister, the same Eliza who'd refused to attend our wedding because she thought I wasn't suitable for her brother, the same Eliza who'd miraculously reconnected with Samuel once his business took off. "You must be Karen," she said, her voice calm but with an edge sharp enough to cut paper. "I'm Eliza Ross, Samuel's sister." I nodded. "Nice to meet you," I said, though we both knew it wasn't our first meeting. But why dredge up old grievances? Is it? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I have to say, I'm surprised you came today, after all this time." "He was my husband for 25 years, I said simply. "And you've been divorced for 26. She glanced around the room. "Samuel rebuilt everything after you left. Everything. The company. His reputation." She looked directly at me now. "His family." I could have said many things. That I remembered when Eliza wouldn't even visit for Christmas because she and Samuel had fought over their parents' estate. That she had only reconnected with him once the money started flowing. That she'd been cold to Daniel until he started showing signs of business acumen. But what was the point in airing old laundry at a funeral? "I'm just here to pay my respects," I said. "Well, you've done that." She gave me a final appraising look. "I assume we'll see you at the reading tomorrow." Before I could answer, she walked away, joining a group of people by the door. I was about to leave when I noticed Daniel standing near the entrance with a woman I assumed was his wife. Amanda. She was tall, sleek, with glossy dark hair, and the kind of confident posture that comes from a lifetime of getting what you want. They were speaking with an older couple, all polished smiles and appropriate nods. I hadn't seen Daniel up close in almost 3 years. Not since he briefly stopped by on his way to a business conference. We'd had coffee at a diner, 40 minutes of weather talk and vague updates on his life. He mentioned a promotion. I told him about my new bird feeder. Then he was gone. Back to his real life, the one that didn't include me. As I watched him now, I saw more of Samuel in him than ever before, the way he stood, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing precisely as he spoke, the way he leaned forward slightly when someone important was talking, the calculated laugh. Gone was the boy who used to wear mismatched socks and build elaborate forts out of sofa cushions. I decided to slip out the side door without approaching him, but as I turned to go, I felt a hand on my arm. "You're Karen, aren't you?" The man was in his 70s, with kind eyes and a worn face. He wore a simple black suit that had seen better days, and a blue tie with a small music note pin. "Yes," I said, surprised. "I'm Charlie Watson. I used to play saxophone at the Blue Note. Back when you and Samuel ran it." I felt a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time that day. "Charlie? Of course I remember you. Sunday nights. Always ordered the same sandwich turkey with extra pickles and a side of that horrible coleslaw you loved." He chuckled. "You've got a good memory. Those were good days, weren't they? Before Reagan and MTV changed everything." "They were," I agreed, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. It was like finding a familiar landmark in a foreign country. Charlie glanced around before speaking lower. "He never really left it behind. You know." "What do you mean?" "The music." Charlie nodded toward the photo at the front of the room. "Once a month, regular as clockwork, he'd come down to Jimbo's Jazz Club on the edge of town. Used a different name. Mark Reed. Played piano for 3 hours straight. Never took requests, never acknowledged the crowd. Just played, like in the old days." I felt something catch in my throat. I didn't know. Most folks didn't. The Samuel Mitchell of Mitchell Real Estate Group doesn't play piano in dive bars. He smiled sadly. But Mark Reed sure could make that piano talk. Played your song sometimes. Too. My song? That waltz he wrote for you? I'd recognize it anywhere. A commotion near the front drew our attention. Daniel was watching us, his expression unreadable. Charlie patted my arm. You take care. Karen, it was good to see you again. As he walked away, I felt like he'd handed me a missing puzzle piece to a picture I'd stopped trying to complete long ago. Daniel found me just before I left. He stepped in close, eyes narrowed, but voice steady. You shouldn't have come. I looked at him. I came to pay my respects. He wouldn't have wanted you here. He said you walked away. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to say he walked away first, but there was no point in rehashing what neither of us would ever agree on. He didn't leave you anything, he added. So, don't get any ideas. Just don't make a scene. I almost smiled. I'm not here for money. Daniel, I'm here because I was married to the man for 25 years. That counts for something, even if you don't think it does. He shook his head. This is a business gathering. Don't turn it into something else. Then he turned and walked off before I could say more. A petite woman with sleek dark hair approached, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mrs. Mitchell. Her smile was practiced and cool. I'm Amanda, Daniel's wife. We haven't officially met. Nice to meet you, I said, though it wasn't. Not really. I just wanted to introduce myself, since Daniel mentioned you'd be at the reading tomorrow. She looked me up and down, her assessment barely concealed. It's interesting that Samuel included you after all this time. Yes, it is, I agreed, giving away nothing. Daniel has worked so hard to build the company with his father. He's been the backbone of operations for years now. Her tone was conversational, but her message was clear. I'm sure Samuel recognized that in his arrangements. I'm sure he did what he thought was right, I replied. She smiled tightly. Well, we look forward to putting all this behind us and moving forward. The company has some exciting developments coming up. Daniel has brilliant plans. I nodded. I'm glad to hear it. If you'll excuse me, I should be going. As I walked away, I could feel her eyes on my back, calculating, assessing. I didn't turn around. I didn't drive straight home. I parked 2 blocks away from the lawyer's office and sat in the car for a while, watching people walk by in suits and heels, checking their watches, carrying their cups of coffee like props in a play about important people doing important things. I thought about what Charlie had said, about Samuel playing piano under a different name, about the newspaper article and the anonymous donation, about the man I'd known and the man he'd become, and whether they were as different as I'd always believed. As I sat there, I felt the weight of Samuel's death settle on me properly for the first time. Not just the end of a life, but the end of possibilities of questions that would never be answered, of conversations that would never happen. Even after all these years of silence, there had always been the possibility. Now there was only the certainty of what would never be. Back before the money, before the lawyers, before the bitterness, Samuel Mitchell was a man who played piano like he meant it. We met in Mobile, Alabama in the summer of 1972. Vietnam was still raging, Watergate was just beginning, and American Pie played on every jukebox in town. I was working at a small gift shop downtown, selling postcards and handmade candles. I wore bell-bottoms and platform shoes like everyone else. My hair long and straight with bangs that needed constant trimming. He came in asking for directions to a jazz club, wore a linen shirt too big for him, and carried sheet music rolled up in his hand. His hair was longer than was still considered respectable in Alabama, and he had the focused intensity of someone who lived inside his own head. We got to talking, and he invited me to see him play that night. I didn't go, but the next day he came back, brought me a cup of sweet tea, and asked again. That time I went. The club was small, smoky, with red tablecloths and candles stuck in wax-covered Chianti bottles, very 1970s chic. He wasn't famous, not even close, but when he sat behind that piano, something shifted in the room. He didn't play for applause. He played like it was the only way he knew how to speak. I watched him from the corner of the room, one hand on my drink, the other on my knee, and I thought, this man lives in the music. It was the most attractive thing I'd ever seen, not his face or his clothes, but that complete surrender to something he loved. We started dating not long after that. Long walks through downtown, late-night breakfasts at Waffle House. He used to hum to me when I was tired, brushing his fingers against my wrist while we sat on the porch. He had big ideas. Said one day he'd open a music cafe, not just a place for coffee and sandwiches, but a real space for local musicians, a place where folks could feel something. I believed in that dream. I still do. We got married in the spring of 1974. We didn't have much. My wedding dress cost $52 from a secondhand shop. His suit didn't quite fit in the shoulders. But we laughed through the whole ceremony. We were in love, and back then that felt like enough. In 1976, we opened the Blue Note, just a 2-room shop with a piano in the corner, secondhand furniture, and framed black and white photos of old jazz legends. We served coffee, sandwiches, and sweet rolls I baked at home. On Friday nights, Samuel would play for hours while people drank cheap wine and clapped along. Sometimes local kids would bring their guitars or harmonicas and join in. It wasn't fancy, but it had heart. Those were the best years of my life. The years before ambition and resentment crept in like unwelcome guests who never leave. Our first employees were a mix of college students and jazz enthusiasts who worked for little more than free coffee and the chance to be part of something special. There was Lily, an art student who painted our menus by hand, Miguel, who washed dishes and occasionally played trumpet, and Arthur Jenkins, a retired accountant who handled our books in exchange for a sandwich and a place to sit and listen to music all day. Arthur was the one who first saw potential beyond the cafe. You know, he told Samuel one day, this building's going up for sale. You should consider buying it. Samuel laughed. With what money? Art? Arthur shook his head. There are ways. Investment partners, small business loans. This location's going to be worth something someday. That conversation planted a seed. Samuel started talking to local businessmen who came into the cafe. He began to see opportunities where before he'd only seen walls. Daniel was born in '78. I still remember the way Samuel cried when he first held him. Said he'd teach him the piano one day. Said our boy would have music in his bones. For the first few years, Daniel grew up in the cafe, napping in a playpen in the back room, charming customers with his toothy grin. Samuel would hold him on his lap while playing simple tunes, guiding Daniel's tiny fingers over the keys. Feel that, he'd say. That's what life sounds like. Those early days were beautiful in their simplicity. We didn't have much, but we had each other and the cafe and the music. That was enough. But somewhere in the early '80s, something shifted. It started small. Samuel began taking side gigs outside the cafe weddings, business luncheons. Then Arthur convinced him to go in on a small investment property, a duplex they renovated and rented out. It's a safety net, Samuel explained when I questioned the time it was taking away from the cafe. For Daniel's future, then came more rental homes, a storage unit franchise, a car wash. The piano gathered dust. He still played, but not like before, not for joy, more like out of habit, when no one else was around. I asked him once if he missed it. He said, "Music doesn't pay the bills, Karen." That stung. We used to say it wasn't about the bills. We used to believe that music fed something bills couldn't touch. The cafe started losing money. Not because it wasn't loved, but because Samuel's time was going elsewhere. Eventually, he sold it. Didn't even ask me first. Just came home one day and said it was done. Said it was time to scale up. I remember standing in our tiny kitchen holding a dish towel, staring at him like I didn't recognize who I'd married. The man who once played Moonlight in Vermont, with his eyes closed, swaying to a rhythm only he could feel, was now talking about market values and ROI. "We can always open another cafe later," he said, not meeting my eyes. "When we're more established," but I knew then we never would. The blue note was gone, and with it, a piece of the man I'd married. Arthur became Samuel's full-time business partner. They opened an office downtown, hired staff, started wearing suits to meetings. Samuel dressed sharper, carried a briefcase, stopped singing in the shower, stopped holding my hand in public. He'd come home late, briefcase full of papers, eyes tired but excited as he talked about property values and investment returns. I'd listen and nod, but inside I was watching something precious slip away. It wasn't just the cafe or the music, it was us. It was the way we used to lean into each other, the way we used to finish each other's sentences, the way we used to share the same dream. When I miscarried in '84, Samuel was out of town, some real estate conference in Atlanta. I called him from the hospital. He said he'd try to catch the next flight back. He didn't make it. I was in that hospital bed alone, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry because the nurse kept coming in with forms for me to sign, forms asking about insurance and next of kin, and who would be taking me home. When he finally got there, the first thing he said was, "You should have called sooner." I didn't say anything. What was there to say that I did call? As soon as I could, that I needed him. Not his excuses. That I was grieving not just the baby we'd lost, but the marriage that was slipping through my fingers after that. We didn't speak much at all, unless it was about bills or groceries or Daniel's school. I started keeping a journal just to feel like someone was listening. I wrote about missing the cafe, about missing the man Samuel used to be, about missing myself, the woman who believed in dreams. I don't know exactly when the affairs began. There wasn't some big reveal or confrontation, just signs. He'd get texts at odd hours. Started keeping his phone face down on the table. I'd find receipts for dinners I didn't eat, necklaces I didn't wear. One night, I sat on the porch and waited until he came home at 2:00. I asked him if he was in love with someone else. He looked tired, not guilty, just tired. "I don't know," he said. "Does it matter?" I didn't yell, didn't throw anything. I just nodded, got up, and went inside. I slept in Daniel's room that night. The next day, I started packing. The company was growing by then. Mitchell Real Estate Group, with offices in Charlotte and plans to expand to Atlanta. Samuel was becoming someone people recognized at Chamber of Commerce meetings, someone whose name appeared in the business section of the local paper. But at home, he was a ghost, a man who moved through rooms without leaving any trace of himself behind. Not the man who once played piano with such passion that strangers would stop their conversations to listen. Daniel was 11 when I left. Old enough to understand something was wrong, young enough to still believe things could be fixed. I told him we were going to live somewhere quieter, that his daddy would visit when he could. I took what I could carry, left the rest. Samuel didn't fight for custody, didn't ask questions, just signed the papers and went back to work. Sometimes I think he was relieved, like he'd finally cleared space in his life for the next phase. But when I let myself go there, in quiet moments like this, I imagine him sitting at the piano in that empty house late one night, playing something soft, not for a crowd, not for me, just because he missed who he used to be. The man who played Karen's waltz with his eyes closed, swaying to the music of our shared dreams. I chose silence over suffering, but I never stopped hearing the piano. I didn't drive straight home after the funeral. Instead, I found myself following a familiar route through downtown Asheville, past new boutiques and coffee shops that hadn't existed when this was my city. Everything looked different, yet somehow the same, like meeting an old friend who'd had extensive plastic surgery. The bones were recognizable, but the features were all wrong, without fully intending to. I parked across the street from what used to be the Blue Note. The building was still there, though it had been transformed several times over. Currently, it housed an upscale bakery with outdoor seating and a chalkboard sign advertising gluten-free pastries. I sat in my car for a long moment, remembering how it used to be: the mismatched chairs, the scarred wooden tables, the smell of coffee and Samuel's cologne as he bent over the piano. There was a time when I knew every creak in those floorboards, every chip in those mugs, every note of every song that filled that space. Now I was just another stranger looking in from the outside. I was about to drive away when I noticed a small brass plaque beside the bakery's entrance. Curious. I got out of my car and crossed the street. On this site from 1976-1982, the Blue Note Cafe fostered local jazz talent and created community through music. The plaque read, at the bottom, in smaller text, established by Samuel and Karen Mitchell. My name. There it was, literally etched in brass, acknowledging something I thought had been erased from history. I touched the plaque with my fingertips, feeling a strange mixture of validation and grief. You didn't know, did you? I turned to find Arthur Jenkins standing a few feet away. He looked older than he had at the funeral, more tired, less formal without his suit jacket, his weathered face creased into a sympathetic smile. No, I said simply. I didn't know. Arthur nodded toward a bench across the street. Got a minute to sit with an old man. We settled on the bench, watching as people entered and exited the bakery, most of them young professionals clutching paper cups and staring at phones. In our day, people lingered over coffee, had actual conversations, listened to the music. Times change, I suppose. Samuel had that plaque installed about 5 years ago. Arthur said, didn't make a big deal of it, didn't hold a ceremony or notify the press, just had it put up one day. Why? I asked. Arthur shrugged. He never said, but that was around the time he started playing again those nights at Jimbo's that Charlie mentioned. I looked down at my hands, noticing how the veins stood out more than they used to. Age has a way of making us more transparent, inside and out. I don't understand. After all these years, why would he? People change. Karen, not always for the better, but sometimes they find their way back to who they were meant to be. I wasn't sure I believed that. The Samuel I'd known had vanished long before I'd packed my bags. The man who played Karen's waltz with his eyes closed had been replaced by someone who saw life as a ledger sheet. You two built something special here, Arthur continued, gesturing toward the building. Before the money, before the company, something real. And he threw it away, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Arthur sighed. Yes, he did. And no, he didn't. At my confused look, he explained, the cafe, yes, but the Blue Note wasn't just a place. It was an idea that music matters, that it connects people. He lost sight of that for a long time. But in his own way, I think he found it again. We sat in silence for a moment, watching as a young couple emerged from the bakery, laughing about something private. They reminded me of Samuel and me, back when we were young and everything seemed possible. Did you know, Arthur said finally, that Samuel anonymously funded a complete renovation of the old Baldwin Theater on Commerce Street, turned it into a nonprofit music venue and education center. They offer free lessons to kids who can't afford them. I shook my head. No, I didn't know that. He was complicated. Karen, not a good husband to you, certainly not a perfect father to Daniel, but there were parts of him you never saw the man he became later. I thought about the newspaper clipping I'd found the anonymous donation to music programs. I'm beginning to understand that. Arthur patted my hand, his palm rough against my skin. The reading's tomorrow, isn't it? I nodded. Don't be surprised by what you hear, he said cryptically. Then he stood, a little stiffly. I should go. Take care. Karen. I watched him walk away, his slight limp more pronounced than it had been during the funeral. When he reached the corner, he turned back. Oh, and Karen. For what it's worth, he never forgot who helped him build that first foundation. Never. With that, he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night in my hotel room, I lay awake for hours, thinking about Arthur's words, about the plaque with my name on it, about the man Samuel had been and the man he'd become, about the son we'd created together and how far he'd drifted from both of us. Outside my window, the Asheville night was alive with music drifting up from the streets below, a saxophone wailing, drums keeping time, voices raised in laughter. Once, This had been our dream to be part of a city that lived and breathed music. Now it felt like a dream I'd had so long ago I could barely remember the details. My phone pinged with a message. It was from Daniel. The reading is at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. No, Mom, no pleasantries. Just a demand thinly disguised as information. I didn't respond. Instead, I got up and dug through my purse until I found the newspaper clipping about the anonymous music program donation. I looked more closely at the photo, at the blurry figure watching the children play. It was definitely Samuel, but there was something in his posture, a softness, a vulnerability that reminded me of the young man who used to close his eyes when he played piano, lost in the music. I fell asleep with the clipping on my nightstand, dreaming of jazz notes and laughter and a time when everything seemed possible. At 2:00 p.m. sharp, I walked into the law office, same polished floors, same quiet receptionist, who led me down a hallway into a conference room with a long table and leather chairs. Daniel was already there, sitting at the far end with a tablet in front of him. Amanda sat beside him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Eliza Ross was there too, seated across from them, her silver bob gleaming under the recessed lighting. Mr. Morgan, the lawyer, greeted me with a nod. Glad you could join us. Mrs. Mitchell? I gave a polite smile and took a seat across from Daniel. He didn't say a word, just glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to his tablet. Amanda offered a tight, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. The air in the room was stiff. A pitcher of water sat in the center of the table, untouched. A stack of folders sat at Mr. Morgan's right. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, then looked at us all. Well, he said, smiling just a little. Let's begin. Daniel straightened in his chair like a man about to be crowned, and I sat still, not expecting anything, but bracing anyway. Because something about that smile told me this wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. Mr. Morgan opened the folder with slow, steady hands, like this was just another day for him. Maybe it was, but for everyone else in that room, everything was about to shift. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the first page, and spoke clearly. This is the last will and testament of Samuel Joseph Mitchell, signed and notarized on January 22nd, 2025. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that little smirk still tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was already planning what to buy, where to invest, how to make a statement with his inheritance. That much was clear. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. To my son, Daniel Marcus Mitchell, I leave the Lake House property in Greenwood County, South Carolina, along with all furnishings therein. I also leave him $300,000 in securities to be transferred from my managed investment accounts. Daniel gave a quick nod like he was confirming something he already knew. Mr. Morgan kept reading. These gifts are contingent on Daniel's continued service as Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Real Estate Group for a minimum of 3 years following my death or until the company is dissolved or sold. Failure to meet this condition will result in the forfeiture of both the property and financial bequest. That caught Daniel off guard. His head lifted, eyes narrowing. Excuse me, he said, voice calm but edged. He wanted what Mr. Morgan looked up. He made it clear. Daniel, you must remain in your current position for at least 3 years unless the company is sold or legally dissolved. Otherwise, these items revert to the estate. Daniel scoffed. He knew I was considering stepping down. We talked about it. I can only go by the document, Morgan replied. And this is what your father signed. Daniel straightened his tie, trying to regain control. He didn't like surprises. Samuel probably knew that. The lawyer turned to the next page. To my sister, Eliza Jean Ross, I leave my collection of antique jazz records and memorabilia, along with $100,000 to be paid in a lump sum from my personal accounts. Eliza's face tightened. She had clearly expected more. Her fingers drummed once on the table before she controlled them. To Arthur Jenkins, My oldest friend and business partner. I leave my shares in the Baldwin Theater Foundation and $250,000 in gratitude for his years of loyalty and wisdom. I smiled slightly at that. Arthur deserved recognition for all he'd done. To Elena Martinez, daughter of Rosa Martinez, I leave $150,000 to be used for her continuing education or professional development in the medical field. My breath caught. Elena Rosa's daughter. The one Samuel had anonymously helped with nursing school. How had he kept track of her all these years? To the Blue Note Music Education Initiative, I leave $5 million to establish a permanent endowment for music education programs in Asheville Public Schools. The Blue Note. Our cafe's name, living on in a program I'd never heard of. Another piece of the puzzle that was the man Samuel had become. The lawyer turned to the next page, and the room grew still. Even Daniel sat straighter, his confidence visibly wavering. To my former wife, Karen Jean Mitchell. The lawyer paused. Looking up at me over his glasses, I felt my heart quicken. Not from expectation of money, but from the strange sensation of hearing my name in Samuel's final testament, of being acknowledged after all these years. I leave the controlling 51% ownership of Mitchell Real Estate Group, including voting rights and board authority. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Daniel made a choked sound, half laugh, half disbelief. What, Mr. Morgan continued without pausing. I also leave her the residential property located at 23 Oak Hills Lane, Asheville, North Carolina, and $35 million in liquid assets held in trust since 2004 under her name. I blinked. I thought I'd misheard. My mind had to loop those words a few times before they landed. Daniel turned to me, stunned. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. "You're kidding," he finally said. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of mistake." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My hands were folded tightly in my lap. I hadn't moved. This is ridiculous," he said, now standing. "She had nothing to do with the business. She's not even in the family anymore. She wasn't in his life. She wasn't in our lives." He pointed across the table at me like I was a problem to be solved. "You probably talked him into this," he said. "What did you do?" "Show up last year pretending to care." "I haven't seen him since 1999, I said quietly. "Oh, come on," he snapped. "You think I believe he just handed over his company to you out of guilt? You left. You walked away." The lawyer finally looked up. "Mr. Mitchell, please sit down. There's more." Daniel didn't move. "There must be a revised version," he said. "Or some sort of side agreement. Dad was smart. He wouldn't leave the business in her hands. She doesn't even know how it works." Mr. Morgan didn't flinch. "Your father anticipated this reaction. That's why he recorded a video message to be played today following the formal reading." I turned slowly to face him. "A video. He recorded it a few weeks before his death." Mr. Morgan continued. "He wanted both of you to hear it." Daniel sat down hard, his face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Play it," he said. "Let's hear the explanation for this insanity." Morgan reached under the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, then set it up so we could all see. And there he was, Samuel, sitting in a leather chair, wearing a simple black sweater, no tie, no rings, just him and the camera. His hair was thinner. His face looked more tired than I remembered, but his eyes, they were sharp, clear. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I'm gone, and if you're both sitting there, then things went the way I wanted." He leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, I imagine you're upset. You probably think this was a mistake. It's not. I made this decision after years of thinking it through. This isn't about revenge. It's about putting things where they belong." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "Karen, I never gave you the credit you deserved. Not for the early years. Not for standing beside me when all I had was music and a cheap coffee machine. You held the whole thing together while I chased the dream. And when I lost myself in all of it, you didn't just survive. You carried our son when I wasn't man enough to do it. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away from the screen. I built something, yes, but you were the one who laid the first bricks, and I never said thank you, not once. He sat back in the chair. So this is me saying it now. The company, the assets, the trust they go to you because I want what's left of my name in the hands of someone who knows the value of things that don't come with a dollar sign. He turned toward his camera again. Daniel, you have everything you need. You've had every door opened for you. But there's a difference between building and inheriting. Maybe someday you'll understand that. The screen went black. Silence hung heavy in the room. I looked down at my hands. Daniel said nothing, and the lawyer. He just leaned back in his chair, folded the papers, and waited. After the video ended, no one said a word. Daniel looked like the ground had shifted under him. His jaw tightened. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the table, lips pressed together, like he was holding back a storm. I stayed quiet, still trying to catch up to everything I'd just heard. Mr. Morgan let the silence settle for a moment. Then, like he was used to moments like this, he pulled a sealed envelope from the folder and placed it gently in front of him. There's one more thing, he said. Samuel left a written letter addressed to both of you. He asked that I read it aloud after the recording. He looked at me, then at Daniel, who still hadn't moved. Then he opened the envelope and unfolded the pages. His voice was steady, like someone used to hard truths. To Karen and Daniel, if you're hearing this, I've already said what I needed to say on video, but I wanted to leave you with something more personal, something not scripted by lawyers or held back by business language. Mr. Morgan glanced up briefly, then continued. Karen, I owe you more than you ever asked for. You were there when there was no empire, when I was scraping together enough tips from playing piano in coffee shops to buy groceries. You didn't care about money, you cared about me, about the music, about what we were building together, and I threw it away, chasing more. The words landed hard, not because I didn't already know them deep down, but because I never thought I'd hear him admit it. You warned me in your own way. You tried to slow me down. You told me we were losing something important, and I didn't listen. I traded something real for something shiny, and I've lived with that silence ever since. Mr. Morgan paused again. Daniel shifted in his seat. His eyes were still fixed on the tabletop, but his jaw was set now, like he was bracing for something. Daniel, I know this doesn't make sense to you right now. You've spent your whole life thinking success means power, titles, results, and in business, maybe it does, but there's another kind of success, one I didn't understand until much later, the kind of success your mother lived every day. I felt something tight in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that out loud, even longer since it came from Samuel. She didn't need a title to be strong. She didn't need applause to be steady. She just showed up over and over, even when no one thanked her for it. You grew up in a world where everything had a price tag. I gave you the best schools, the right mentors, the perfect path, but I never taught you how to slow down or how to listen. I watched you become the kind of man I used to be, the kind of man who sees people as positions, who wins every meeting but misses the point. Mr. Morgan's voice softened. That's on me. I take responsibility for that. I thought I was protecting you from struggle, but I ended up robbing you of perspective. And now, in this final hour, I see it for what it is. You may not understand this today. You may not agree. But this is my apology, my will, and my final correction. I looked over. Daniel's hands were clenched in his lap. He wasn't the calm executive now. He was a son who'd just been told that the ground he stood on wasn't as solid as he thought. Karen, you were the only person who ever kept me human. You didn't just stand beside me, you steadied me. I didn't know how to appreciate it then, but I know now that's why this is yours. Not out of guilt, not out of regret, but because I know you'll do the right thing. You always did. There was a quiet in the room after that. Real quiet. Not the kind where people are waiting to speak, but the kind where the truth finally lands and no one's sure what to do next. Mr. Morgan folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then he pushed it gently across the table toward me. "It's yours to keep," he said. I took it with both hands. Daniel finally spoke. "So that's it," he said, his voice low but sharp. That's how he ends it. Mr. Morgan didn't answer. Daniel stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, but he looked different now, smaller somehow, like the words had chipped away at something he thought was untouchable. He didn't look at me. "This is wrong," he said. He was confused, maybe sick. "No," I said quietly. He was clear. He shook his head and turned to the door. Before he walked out, he paused. "You think this makes you the hero? You think this makes up for walking out?" I looked up at him. "I don't think it makes me anything. I think it just makes it honest." He didn't respond, just opened the door and walked out. Amanda followed without a word, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Eliza remained seated, her face a mask of controlled fury. "My brother always had a flair for the dramatic," she said coldly. "But this is beyond absurd. You'll be hearing from my attorney." She gathered her purse and left, the door closing firmly behind her. I sat there for a while longer, the envelope in my lap, the chair across from me now empty, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I felt something shift, not revenge, not triumph, just release. Samuel didn't give me his business. He gave me back my story. Daniel came back into the room minutes later, his footsteps sharp against the tile. His face was red, and he looked like someone who had been holding his breath for too long. He dropped back into the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "This isn't over," he said. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It carried a sharpness I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, back when he'd slammed doors during arguments about curfews. "I'm not letting this stand." Mr. Morgan raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Daniel continued. "She has no claim to this. None. He must have been confused when he signed this will. Maybe he was pressured. Maybe—" He paused and pointed directly at me. "Maybe you talked to him. Maybe you found a way to twist him around before he died." I shook my head. "I haven't spoken to him in 26 years. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Oh, come on. And I'm supposed to believe that after all this time, out of nowhere, he leaves you control of everything $35 million. The company," his voice cracked on the word company. "Mr. Morgan cleared his throat. "Mr. Mitchell, I can assure you that your father's will was prepared with the utmost care. He underwent a full medical evaluation 8 weeks before signing. Both mental and physical health were certified by 2 separate physicians." Daniel turned sharply toward the lawyer. "You're telling me he was of sound mind when he wrote this, when he decided to throw away years of my work and hand it all to—" He stopped, glancing at me. "To someone who hasn't been part of this family in decades." Mr. Morgan remained calm. "Your father was deliberate. He reviewed the terms multiple times and confirmed his wishes in writing and on record." Daniel stood up again, running a hand through his hair. He paced the room like a man searching for something to break. "This is insane," he muttered. "He built all of this with me by his side. I worked for him. I gave up opportunities because he asked me to. And now he leaves it all to her." He stopped and looked at me. "You don't deserve this." I stayed quiet. I'd learned long ago that arguing with anger only made it grow. "You think this makes up for the years you abandoned us?" he pressed. "You left. You quit on Dad. You quit on me." I looked at him. "I never quit on you. Daniel, I left a marriage that was destroying me. That's different." He scoffed. "Oh, private. This is just some twisted way for him to make you the victim." His words stung, but I held my ground. There was nothing I could say that would change what he believed about me. He'd been raised on Samuel's version of the story, one where I walked out without looking back. In his mind, I was the one who gave up, not the one who tried to hold everything together until it broke. Daniel's voice rose. I'm going to contest this. I don't care how long it takes. I'll get it overturned. The business is mine, and you know it. Mr. Morgan finally spoke. You are, of course, free to pursue legal action, but I can assure you this will is airtight. Every step was documented. Your father was very clear. Daniel clenched his jaw. For a moment, I thought he might shout again. Instead, he pointed at me with a trembling hand. You're nothing but a washed-up ex-wife with a checkbook you didn't earn. That one cut deep, but I didn't let it show. I just looked at him and whispered, I earned every penny in silence. He didn't know what to do with that. His face hardened, but he didn't speak. He just grabbed his tablet and walked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The room was quiet again. I sat there staring at the grain of the table, letting the air settle. For the first time in 26 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. I felt seen not as the ex-wife, not as the woman who left, not as someone who couldn't keep up with the world Samuel built, but as the person who had been there at the beginning when there was nothing but a piano, a notebook, and a dream. I had been part of that foundation. I had carried the weight no one else saw. And now, all these years later, Samuel was acknowledging it. Mr. Morgan leaned forward. Karen, I understand this is a lot to process. If you'd like, we can schedule a follow-up meeting to go over the financial and legal details. I nodded. Yes, that would be good. You don't have to make any immediate decisions, he added. The trust is already established. The company shares are yours. You have time to decide how to handle them. I sat back in my chair, still gripping the envelope with Samuel's letter inside. I hadn't fully processed the numbers, the properties, or the power he had left me. That all felt distant, almost unreal. What stayed with me was the apology. The way he'd said I kept him human. The way he'd finally said thank you, even if it came too late for either of us to say it face to face. As I walked out of the building, the late afternoon sun hit my face. I paused on the steps, taking a breath. My life had just changed in ways I couldn't fully name. Not because of the money, but because a door I thought was locked forever had just been opened. If only a crack. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's story. I was carrying my own. I saw Arthur Jenkins waiting by a bench across the street. He waved me over, his smile gentle but knowing. So he did it, Arthur said as I approached. He actually went through with it. You knew, I asked, sitting beside him. He talked about it for years. Arthur looked up at the sky, squinting against the sun. Started the trust fund back in 2004. Said it was his insurance policy against his own worst instincts. I don't understand, I admitted. Why now? Why ever? Arthur sighed. Samuel was complicated. The man you knew. The one who sold the cafe and chased money that was real. But so was the guilt that came after. The regret. He never reached out, I said. Not once in 26 years. Pride, Arthur replied simply. And fear. I think fear that you'd reject him. Fear that he'd have to face what he'd done to you and Daniel. I thought about that. About the man who could build a business empire but couldn't pick up a phone and say he was sorry. The music programs, I said. The donations. The plaque at the Blue Note. That was all him. Arthur nodded. He never stopped playing, you know. Not completely. He'd shut his office door late at night and play for hours. Said it was the only time he felt like himself. I felt tears threaten and blinked them back. And Daniel. Did Samuel know what was happening between us? Arthur's face grew somber. He knew. He saw the pattern Daniel becoming just like him. By the time he recognized it, the damage was done. So this is what his attempt to fix it. Maybe, Arthur said, or maybe it's just his final acknowledgement of the truth that you deserved better, that Daniel needs to learn what real value is. We sat in silence for a moment, watching as people hurried past, caught up in their own lives, their own stories. What will you do now? Arthur asked finally. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, thinking about the words inside, about the company that was now somehow mine, about the son who looked at me like a stranger. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I think I'll start by going home. It took me 3 weeks before I could bring myself to visit the Oak Hills property. The lawyer had sent the keys by certified mail. They came in a plain white envelope with a typed note confirming the title was transferred. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table, stared at the old brass key resting on my palm, and just sat there. The weight of it was heavier than it looked. I hadn't thought about that house in years, at least not consciously. I knew Samuel kept it as a rental. Over the years, it had been updated, repainted, landscaped to match the neighborhood's rising standards. But back in 1975, it was just a modest brick house on the edge of a quiet road, a starter home back when we had nothing but hope in each other. During those 3 weeks, I moved cautiously through my new reality. I met with Mr. Morgan and a financial advisor he recommended. I signed papers, opened accounts, learned phrases like liquid assets and board voting rights and controlling interest. Daniel filed a preliminary legal challenge to the will, as he'd threatened. Mr. Morgan assured me it had no merit and would likely be dismissed. Daniel didn't call, didn't text. It was as if a final door had closed between us. I didn't make any big decisions. I didn't quit my teaching job or buy a new car or book a cruise around the world. Those things seemed trivial compared to the weight of what Samuel had entrusted to me. Instead, I spent long hours at my kitchen table, reading through company reports, trying to understand what Mitchell Real Estate Group had become. I learned about their current projects, their staff, their community investments. I was surprised to discover a robust charitable arm of the business that funded affordable housing initiatives and small business incubators in low-income neighborhoods. Samuel had built something more complex than I'd imagined, not just a money machine, but an organization with reach and influence that could shape communities. And now, somehow, it was mine to steward. When I finally drove to Oak Hills, the autumn sun was setting, painting the trees in gold and amber. I pulled into the driveway slowly, holding the key tight in my hand. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and something faintly floral. The place was empty but well-maintained. Hardwood floors, fresh paint, granite countertops, nothing like the avocado green kitchen and orange shag carpet we once had. But the bones were the same. I wandered from room to room in silence. The living room, the old hallway, the back bedroom that used to be Daniel's nursery. I touched the door frames, remembering where we once measured his height with a pencil. I ran my hand across the window ledge in the dining room where Samuel used to set his coffee while reading the Sunday paper. Then I stepped into the study. It had been converted into a home office with built-in shelves and a large oak desk. On the desk sat a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart skipped. The handwriting was Samuel's slanted, neat, and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I sat down and opened it slowly. Karen, if you're reading this, it means you came back. I wasn't sure you would, but I hoped you might. I wanted you to see the house. I kept it all these years. Had plenty of chances to sell it, but I couldn't. Something about this place always reminded me of who I used to be. Who we used to be. I kept reading, my fingers gripping the paper tighter with each line. You were right about everything. I just wasn't ready to admit it until it was too late. You told me once that I was becoming someone you didn't recognize, that the man who played piano on quiet Friday nights was disappearing behind board meetings and tax shelters. You were right. I kept chasing more, and the more I got, the less I knew what it meant to be happy. I thought I was building a better life. Turns out I was just building distance. The words blurred for a moment. I blinked quickly, took a breath, and kept reading. There's something in the den I want you to see. I never got rid of it. Couldn't. It always reminded me of you. If you still remember how to play that song, maybe give it one more try. S. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in my lap. My chest felt tight, but I stood up and walked down the hall to the den. And there it was. The old upright piano. The same one we picked up from a thrift store in downtown Mobile back in 1974. The bench had new upholstery, but the piano itself still had a chip on the corner and a few worn keys. I hadn't seen it in over 20 years. I sat down and lifted the lid. The keys were clean, slightly out of tune, but they still held their shape. I let my fingers hover for a moment. Then, without thinking too much, I pressed the first few notes. It was shaky. My hands weren't what they used to be, but the melody was still there. The song he wrote for me in the spring of 1976, it didn't have a name. We just called it Karen's Waltz. He played it the night we signed the papers to buy this house. Back when our lives were full of possibility, before things got too big, too fast, and too cold. I played the notes slowly, one after the other, letting them ring into the quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there listening to the sound of something I thought I'd lost returning to me in pieces. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, his expression uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I knew you'd be here," he said quietly. I didn't stop playing, just turned back to the keys. "How did you know?" "Dad used to come here sometimes, sit at that piano for hours." He stepped into the room. I followed him once. He never knew I was watching. The revelation surprised me. When was this? 5, maybe 6 years ago. I'd never seen him play before. Not really. I continued the gentle melody, letting it fill the space between us. "He was very good once." Daniel moved closer, standing now at the edge of the piano. "That song, I remember it. You used to hum it when I was little." I nodded, finishing the final phrase before letting my hands rest on the keys. "Your father wrote it for me." There was a long silence. I could feel Daniel struggling with something: anger, confusion, perhaps a glimmer of understanding. "I found his journals," he said finally. "After the reading, he kept them in his desk at home, going back years." I looked up at him, waiting. "He wrote about you, about the cafe, about how it all started." Daniel's voice was tight. "About how he drove you away, how he turned me against you." Daniel. "No, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "My whole life, I thought I knew the story. I thought you left because you couldn't handle success, because you were living in the past. That's what he let me believe, what he encouraged me to believe." I stayed silent, giving him space to continue. "But in those journals, he wrote the truth about the affairs, about how he changed, about how he used me to punish you for leaving." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. He looked away. "Probably not." Another silence stretched between us, filled with 2 decades of misunderstandings and missed connections. "I've been so angry since the reading," Daniel admitted. "Furious with him for giving everything to you. Furious with you for being you. I guess, for being the person he ultimately valued more than me." "That's not what this is about," I said. "This isn't about who he valued more. It's about setting things right. By cutting me out, by humiliating me." I shook my head. "Daniel, look at what he actually did. He left you the lake house, the place you loved most growing up. He left you a substantial amount of money. He didn't cut you out. He just didn't give you everything. He gave you the company," Daniel said, his voice tight. "My company?" "No," I said firmly. "Not your company, our company. Started with money from our cafe. Built on a foundation we laid together before you were even born." Daniel started to protest, but I held up my hand. "And here's what you don't understand yet. I don't want to run Mitchell Real Estate. I don't want to take your job or your purpose. What I want is to make sure the company reflects the values it was founded on, not just profit, but community, music, connection." He looked skeptical. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm keeping my controlling interest. But I want you to continue as CEO with some changes." I stood up from the piano bench, facing him directly. the Blue Note Music Education Initiative. I want it expanded. I want music programs in every school, in every community where Mitchell has developments. Daniel's brow furrowed. That's not profitable. It doesn't need to be. That's the point. I moved closer to him. Your father lost his way chasing profits over purpose. I won't let that happen to his legacy, or to you. So what, you're going to be my boss now? Daniel asked. But the edge was gone from his voice, replaced by something like curiosity. I'm going to be your partner, I corrected. If you're willing. If not, I'll find someone else who understands what I'm trying to do. He stared at me for a long moment, seeing me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years. I don't know if I can do that, he said honestly. Be the kind of CEO you're talking about. I've been trained differently. You can learn, I said. Just like your father was starting to learn at the end? Daniel glanced at the piano, then back at me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. Amanda left, he said suddenly, after the reading, said she didn't sign up for a husband who wasn't going to inherit an empire. I winced. I'm sorry, Daniel. He shrugged, but I could see the pain beneath the gesture. Turns out Dad was right about one more thing. I married someone exactly like him, someone who valued the winning more than the person. I didn't know what to say to that. We stood in awkward silence until Daniel spoke again. That day at the lawyer's office, when I said you didn't earn any of this, I was wrong. I didn't understand then. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start, a recognition of something true. Thank you for saying that, I said. He nodded, then looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. So what happens now? Now, I said. We start over. Not as mother and son, that relationship needs time to heal, but as two people who want to honor what Samuel built while making it better. And if I can't do that, if I'm too much like him, I smiled slightly, then I'll remind you of who you were before the world got complicated, of the little boy who used to fall asleep to jazz records, who loved trumpet and wanted to be a musician before his father convinced him that wasn't valuable enough. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, recognition, memory, perhaps even longing. I don't know if I remember how to be that person, he admitted. I gestured toward the piano. Then maybe we start with this, with remembering that before there was Mitchell Real Estate, there was music, there was the Blue Note, there was a family. After a moment's hesitation, Daniel sat on the piano bench. His fingers hovered over the keys uncertainly. I don't really know how to play, he said. That's okay, I replied, sitting beside him. I'll teach you. We'll start with something simple. And so, in the fading light of an autumn evening, in a house filled with ghosts and memories and possibilities, I placed my hands over my son's and showed him how to play the first notes of a song his father had written long ago, a melody that had been waiting all these years to be heard again. For nearly an hour, we sat there, the music filling the space between us in a way words couldn't. When the last note faded, Daniel sat quietly, staring at the keys. I remember when I was 8, he said suddenly. Dad took me to his office, showed me the building plans for that shopping complex on Riverfront, told me someday all this would be mine. He shook his head slowly. I thought that was love preparing me for success. I never understood why you didn't see it that way. I considered my words carefully. Success and happiness aren't always the same thing. Daniel, your father gave you a roadmap to the first but not the second. And you think music is the answer? There was skepticism in his voice, but not the hostility from before. I think balance is the answer. I think remembering where you came from is the answer. I touched a key lightly. This piano isn't just about music. It's about what made your father feel alive before spreadsheets and profit margins. It's about what we built before we built buildings. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, straightening his suit jacket, a reflexive gesture that reminded me so much of Samuel it made my heart ache. I need some time, he said, to think about all this, About what happens next. I nodded. Of course. I've withdrawn the legal challenge, he added, to the will. Thank you. He walked to the doorway, then paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Are you moving back here to this house? I don't know yet, I said honestly. It holds a lot of memories, not all of them good. He nodded, understanding. I'll call you. In a few days. We should talk about the company. I'd like that. After he left, I stayed at the piano for a long time, playing softly, letting the music draw me back through the years. The house felt different now, not just a monument to what was lost, but perhaps a bridge to what might be found again. The next morning, I drove to the Mitchell Real Estate Group headquarters in downtown Asheville. I hadn't planned to go there yet, but after the conversation with Daniel, I felt ready to see what Samuel had built. What was now partly mine to shepherd. The building was impressive 12 stories of glass and steel with the company name emblazoned across the top. I parked in the visitor section and sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage. I wasn't there to make waves or announcements. I just wanted to see it, to understand. The receptionist looked up as I entered the lobby. Can I help you? Her smile was professional, practiced. I'm Karen Mitchell, I said. I'm just here to look around, if that's all right. Her eyes widened slightly with recognition. News travels fast in companies, especially news about ownership. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Would you like me to call Mr. Mitchell? I believe he's in the building today. No, thank you. I'd prefer to just observe on my own for now. She nodded and handed me a visitor's badge. You have full access. Of course, the executive floor is 12, but you might find the community development team on 8 interesting. They handle all our nonprofit partnerships. I thanked her and took the elevator to the 8th floor first. The doors opened to a bright, open workspace filled with younger employees. The walls were covered with project boards and community maps. A large sign read, "Building more than buildings." A woman in her early 30s approached me, hand extended. Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Sofia Garcia, Director of Community Development. We heard you might be visiting soon. Word travels fast, I said, shaking her hand. She smiled. A change in majority ownership tends to make waves, especially when it's someone with your perspective. My perspective. Someone who knew the company before it was a company. Someone who was there at the beginning. She gestured around the workspace. Would you like a tour of what we do here for the next hour? Sophia showed me around, explaining their initiatives, affordable housing projects, community centers, educational partnerships. I was impressed by the scope and thoughtfulness of the work. This department was Mr. Mitchell's special project, she explained. He expanded it significantly over the last 5 years, said it was important we remember our responsibilities to the communities we build in. That sounds unlike the Samuel I knew, I admitted. Sophia gave me a curious look. He changed a lot, from what I understand, especially after his health scare 3 years ago. Health scare. Heart attack, minor one, but it shook him up. After that, he started shifting priorities, spending more time on this floor, less on acquisition. She paused. He talked about you sometimes. That caught me off guard. He did. She nodded. Never in detail. Just things like, Karen would have appreciated this, or this is the kind of project Karen always wanted us to do. I felt a lump form in my throat, all those years, and he'd kept me present in his thoughts, in his decisions, not as an ex-wife to be bitter about, but as a conscience he'd once ignored. Did my son support these initiatives? I asked. Sophia's hesitation told me everything. Mr. Mitchell. Daniel has different priorities, more focused on growth metrics and expansion. He's excellent at what he does. But community development isn't his passion, I finished for her. No, she agreed. It's not. After thanking Sophia, I took the elevator to the top floor. The executive suite was exactly what I expected: plush carpeting, mahogany doors, a hushed atmosphere of importance. Samuel's office now, Daniel's, was at the end of the hall, with a corner view of the mountains. I didn't go in. Instead, I stopped by the assistant's desk outside. "I'm Karen Mitchell. I was hoping to see some company records, if possible." The young man at the desk recognized me immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. What specifically are you looking for?" "Information about the Blue Note Music Education Initiative. I understand it's a foundation that Samuel established." He nodded and quickly pulled up some files on his computer. "The initiative was established 5 years ago. It currently funds music education in 17 schools across western North Carolina, provides instruments to students who can't afford them, and sponsors a summer music camp." He looked up. "Would you like the full financial reports?" "Please, and any strategic plans for expansion." As I reviewed the documents in a conference room, I began to see Samuel's vision more clearly. The foundation wasn't just a charitable tax write-off. It was a comprehensive attempt to bring music education back to communities that had lost it to budget cuts. It focused on schools in lower-income areas, providing not just instruments but teaching staff, after-school programs, and performance opportunities. Samuel had taken our small cafe's name and turned it into something that could impact thousands of children, something that could give them what he'd almost lost, a connection to music that went beyond entertainment. That touched something essential about being human. I was so absorbed in the reports that I didn't notice Daniel enter the conference room until he spoke. "I didn't expect to see you here so soon." I looked up. He stood in the doorway, less hostile than yesterday but still guarded. "I wanted to understand what I'm responsible for now," I said. He nodded, taking a seat across from me. "And what do you think of what my father built?" I closed the file in front of me. "It's impressive, especially this." I tapped the Blue Note Initiative documents. I had no idea he'd created something like this. "He started it after his heart attack," Daniel said. "Became almost obsessed with it. Wanted to put music back in schools that couldn't afford programs anymore." "You don't sound entirely supportive," Daniel sighed. "It's not that I'm against it. It doesn't contribute to the bottom line. We've donated millions that could have been reinvested in acquisitions. Is the bottom line all that matters?" "In business, yes." He leaned forward. "Mom, I know you're thinking about all this through the lens of that cafe you and Dad had. But this is a corporation now, with shareholders, employees who depend on our success, projects with deadlines and budgets." "I understand that," I said. "But corporations have responsibilities beyond profit. They have power to shape communities, for better or worse." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it almost made me smile. "You sound just like him, these last few years. At least, that's because he finally remembered what we both knew at the beginning, that there has to be balance." I pushed the file toward him. "This initiative, I want to double its budget and expand to every city where Mitchell has a presence." He stared at me. "You can't be serious. That would cost about $20 million over the next 5 years, which is less than 5% of the company's projected profits during that same period." I smiled at his surprised expression. "Yes, I've been doing my homework. The board won't approve it. With my 51% voting rights, they will." I softened my tone. "Daniel, I'm not here to dismantle what you and your father built. I'm here to enhance it, to remind it of its soul." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me. "You really aren't interested in the money, are you?" "The money is a tool," I said. "What matters is what you build with it." Something shifted in his expression, then a recognition, perhaps, of the truth in my words. He might not agree with me yet, but he was beginning to understand me. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "About all of it." "Take your time," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." 1 month later, I sat in the boardroom of Mitchell Real Estate Group, facing 12 board members who regarded me with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. Daniel sat at the opposite end of the table, his face carefully neutral. This was my first official board meeting as majority shareholder. I'd spent weeks preparing. meeting with financial advisors, studying the company's structure, and learning more about the real estate industry than I ever thought I'd need to know. "Thank you all for being here," I began. "I know my presence represents a significant change for this company. I want to assure you that my intention is not to disrupt the successful business Samuel and Daniel have built, but to enhance it by reconnecting it with its original values." A man in his 60s, Harold Brewer, according to the seating chart, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mrs. Mitchell, what exactly do you know about running a real estate development corporation?" "Absolutely nothing," I said pleasantly. Several board members exchanged glances. "That's why I'm not going to run it. Daniel will continue as CEO. With the full support of his leadership team, my role is to help shape the vision and values of this company, not its day-to-day operations." Relief visibly swept through the room. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. "What I do understand," I continued, "is the foundation this company was built on, not just financially, but spiritually. Before Mitchell Real Estate Group, there was the Blue Note Cafe, a place that valued community, music, and human connection above all else." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing a black and white photo of the original cafe. Samuel and I stood in front, young and smiling, his arm around my shoulders. Samuel and I started with nothing but a dream to create a space where people could come together through music. That dream evolved, as dreams do, into something larger, into this company. But somewhere along the way, the soul of that original dream got lost. I clicked to the next slide, showing the plaque outside what was once the Blue Note. In his final years, Samuel began to reconnect with that original vision. The Blue Note Music Education Initiative was part of that journey. Today, I want to propose expanding that initiative as part of a broader commitment to corporate social responsibility. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my proposal doubling the music education budget, creating affordable housing quotas for every new development, establishing apprenticeship programs for young people from underserved communities, and forming a committee to evaluate the social impact of every major project. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Harold Brewer spoke again. "These are admirable goals, Mrs. Mitchell, but they will significantly impact our profit margins." "They will impact short-term profits," I agreed. "But they will enhance long-term value both for our balance sheet and for the communities we serve." Companies with strong social responsibility programs outperform their peers in the long run. They attract better talent, earn customer loyalty, and build resilience against market fluctuations. Another board member, a younger woman named Jennifer Liu, nodded slowly. "There's research supporting that, and we've already seen positive results from the existing Blue Note initiative in terms of community goodwill." "Exactly," I said. "This isn't charity. It's strategic investment in our future." The discussion continued for another hour, sometimes heated, always respectful. I could see the board members weighing the proposals, considering the implications. Some were resistant, others intrigued. Finally, Daniel spoke up for the first time. "I think my mother's proposals have merit." All eyes turned to him in surprise. "I've had weeks to consider them, to run the numbers, to think about what they mean for our company's future. And while I have some modifications to suggest, I believe the overall direction is sound." He stood and walked to the front of the room, standing beside me. Mitchell Real Estate was founded by my father, but its roots go back to the Blue Note, to the partnership between my parents, to values that got sidelined in the pursuit of growth. He looked directly at me. "I think it's time we remembered where we came from." The vote wasn't unanimous, but with Daniel's support and my controlling interest, the proposals passed. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake my hand, to express cautious support or ask follow-up questions. When the room was empty except for Daniel and me, I turned to him. "Thank you. I know that wasn't easy," he shrugged. "It's the right thing to do, for the company and for me." He paused. "I've been thinking a lot about what Dad wrote in his journals, about losing himself, I don't want that to happen to me. It won't, I said firmly. Not now. Later that week, I visited the site of the Blue Note, now Willow Bakery, and asked to speak with the owner. Emma Chen was a woman in her early 40s with a warm smile and flour-dusted hands. Mrs. Mitchell, I recognized you from the plaque, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I've always wondered about the original Blue Note. It's something of a legend around here. Call me Karen, please. And it wasn't legendary, just a small cafe with big dreams. We sat at a corner table, and I told her about the early days, the mismatched furniture, the late-night jam sessions, the community that formed around cups of coffee and live music. That sounds wonderful, Emma said wistfully. So different from today, when everyone rushes in for their coffee and leaves, staring at their phones. An idea began to form in my mind. Have you ever thought about adding live music to the bakery? Maybe one night a week? Her eyes lit up. Actually, yes, but I wasn't sure how to start or if there would be interest. I think there would be, I said. In fact, I'd like to propose a partnership. What if Mitchell Real Estate funded a small renovation to create a performance space in the back of your bakery? Nothing elaborate, just a corner with proper acoustics, some seating, maybe a small sound system. You could host local musicians 1 or 2 nights a week. That sounds amazing, but why would Mitchell Real Estate want to invest in my little bakery? I smiled. Let's just say it's part of our new community initiative, and it would mean a lot to me personally to see music return to this space. 2 months later, Blue Notes at Willow held its first performance night. The back of the bakery had been transformed into a cozy listening space with soft lighting and surprisingly good acoustics. Charlie Watson and his jazz quartet were the inaugural performers. The place was packed, not just with young hipsters, but with a mix of ages: college students, middle-aged couples, seniors who remembered the original Blue Note. They sat at small tables, drinking coffee and wine, eating Emma's pastries, and really listening to the music. No phones in sight, no rushing out the door. I stood at the back, watching Charlie close his eyes as he played, swaying slightly with the saxophone, looking for all the world like he'd stepped right out of 1978. It wasn't the Blue Note, not exactly, but it carried the same spirit, the same belief that music could bring people together in a way nothing else could. Daniel arrived halfway through the first set, slipping in quietly to stand beside me. "This is nice," he said, surveying the room. "Really nice." "It is, isn't it? I brought something for you." He handed me a small velvet pouch. "Found it in Dad's safe deposit box. There was a note saying it should go to you." I opened the pouch and tipped the contents into my palm. It was a small silver treble clef pin, the same one I'd given Samuel on our first anniversary, when we had barely enough money for rent. "I can't believe he kept this," I whispered, running my finger over the tarnished silver. "There's a lot he kept that you don't know about," Daniel said softly. As Charlie's quartet finished their set, Emma took the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight. Many of you know that this space was once the Blue Note Cafe, founded by Samuel and Karen Mitchell. Well, Karen is here with us tonight, and I've asked her if she might share a story or two about the original Blue Note." The crowd applauded. Turning to look at me expectantly, Daniel nudged me forward. "Go on, Mom. They want to hear from you." I hesitated, then made my way to the small stage. Standing before the microphone, I looked out at the sea of faces, strangers united by music and curiosity. "The Blue Note wasn't fancy," I began. "We had secondhand furniture and chipped coffee mugs, but we had something money couldn't buy, a sense that when you walked through those doors, you became part of something larger than yourself. You became part of a community held together by music." For the next 10 minutes, I shared stories about Miguel the dishwasher, who played trumpet like a dream, about the night the power went out and everyone sang by candlelight, about Samuel composing at the piano, while a summer thunderstorm provided percussion outside. When I finished, a woman in her 70s raised her hand. "I used to come here with my husband every Friday night. He's gone now, But being here tonight, hearing the music again, it feels like he's sitting right beside me. A young man spoke up next. I never knew this place existed, but it sounds like what we're all searching for, somewhere to belong, to connect with something real. As the evening wound down, Charlie played one final song, a slow, soulful rendition of Moonlight in Vermont, Samuel's favorite. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, feeling a sense of completion I hadn't experienced in years. When I opened them again, I saw Daniel watching me from across the room, his expression thoughtful, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the little boy who used to fall asleep to the sound of his father's piano, the child who had music in his bones before the world taught him to value spreadsheets instead. 6 months after that first night at Willow Bakery, the Blue Notes music series had become a local sensation, with performances 3 nights a week and a waiting list of musicians eager to play. Emma had hired a part-time music coordinator, and the bakery's business had doubled. But tonight was special. Tonight was the grand opening of the expanded Baldwin Theater, now the Mitchell Center for Music Education, which had been renovated and enlarged using funds from the Blue Note Initiative. I stood in the lobby, watching as families streamed in for the opening concert. Children clutched instrument cases, their faces a mix of nervousness and excitement. Parents snapped photos and straightened bow ties and hair ribbons. The center now housed practice rooms, classrooms, a recording studio, and a 300-seat performance space. It offered free lessons to children from low-income households and subsidized instruments through a Play It Forward program. But more importantly, it offered a place where music was treated not as an extracurricular activity, but as an essential part of being human. Arthur Jenkins approached, leaning more heavily on his cane than he had 6 months ago, but smiling broadly. "Samuel would be proud," he said, surveying the bustling lobby. "This is what he wanted to build all along. He just got distracted for a few decades." I laughed. "That's one way to put it." "Have you decided about the house yet?" Arthur asked. I nodded. "I'm keeping it, but I'm making some changes, turning the formal dining room into a music room, opening up the kitchen to the living room, making it mine instead of just a monument to the past." "Good for you." He squeezed my arm gently. "And how's Daniel doing with all of this?" "Better than I expected," I admitted. "The company's doing well, even with our new initiatives, and he's softer somehow, less driven by numbers alone." Arthur's eyes twinkled. "And I hear he's playing again." "Yes," I said, unable to hide my smile. "Trumpet, just for himself, not performing, but it's a start." As if summoned by our conversation, Daniel appeared at the entrance, carrying a trumpet case. He spotted us and made his way over. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing my cheek. "Board meeting ran long. But good news, we got unanimous approval for the Denver expansion, complete with the affordable housing component and the community arts space." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. The company was evolving, finding a balance between profit and purpose that seemed to energize rather than hinder it. "Are you ready for tonight?" Arthur asked, nodding toward Daniel's trumpet case. Daniel grimaced. "As ready as I'll ever be. I haven't performed in public since high school." "You'll be great," I assured him. The children's orchestra performed first 60 young musicians from across the county, many of whom had never touched an instrument before joining the Blue Note program. They weren't perfect. There were missed notes and timing issues, but they played with heart, with joy, with the pure delight of creating something beautiful together. After intermission, a small jazz combo took the stage, Charlie on saxophone, 3 professional musicians from the Asheville Symphony, and to my continued amazement, Daniel on trumpet. They started with a standard Autumn Leaves, then moved into more complex pieces. Daniel was good, not professional quality, but solid, confident. He swayed slightly as he played, eyes closed during his solo, lost in the music in a way that reminded me painfully of Samuel. For their final number, Charlie stepped up to the microphone. "We'd like to close with a special piece, written by Samuel Mitchell back in 1976. It's called Karen's Waltz. And we've invited someone special to join us for this one. He gestured toward the side of the stage, where a piano had been wheeled out. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. Daniel looked straight at me, nodding encouragement. I hadn't performed in public in over 40 years. My hands weren't as nimble as they once were. But as I walked to the piano and sat down, a strange calm settled over me. I placed my fingers on the keys and began the familiar melody, the one Samuel had written for me all those years ago. The one he'd continued to play long after I was gone. As the waltz tempo established itself, Charlie's saxophone joined in, then Daniel's trumpet, weaving around the melody, enhancing but never overshadowing it. We played together mother and son, past and present, memory and possibility, creating something new from the fragments of what had been lost. The music filled the hall, wrapped around the audience, connected us all in a moment of shared beauty. When the final notes faded, there was a beat of silence before the applause began. I looked over at Daniel to find him watching me, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears or pride or understanding, or perhaps all three. After the concert, as the crowd mingled in the lobby, Daniel pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you," he said. "I've been seeing someone, a music teacher at the community college. Her name is Olivia." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "How did you meet?" "Here. Actually, she volunteers with the children's program on weekends." He looked slightly embarrassed. "She's nothing like Amanda. She drives an old Volvo with bumper stickers, lives in a tiny apartment filled with books, and thinks corporate America is the root of all evil." I laughed. "She sounds perfect." "She challenges me," Daniel admitted. "Makes me think about things differently. I'd like you to meet her." "I'd like that too." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about stepping back a bit from the company. Not leaving entirely, but maybe shifting my focus. Promoting Jennifer Liu to co-CEO to handle more of the day-to-day operations while I focus on our community initiatives." I studied his face, seeing not just Samuel now but echoes of the thoughtful boy he'd once been. "Are you sure that's a big change?" "I'm sure," he smiled. "Turns out there's more to life than being the boss." Who knew? Later that night, after everyone had gone, I returned to the theater. The stage was empty now, the instruments packed away, the sheet music collected, but the piano remained, gleaming under a single spotlight. I sat down and played a few notes of Karen's waltz, listening to them echo in the empty hall. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver treble clef pin Samuel had kept all these years. I pinned it to the inside of the piano lid, where only the pianist would see it. A private message, a connection across time, a thank you to the man who had given me back my story. As I closed the piano lid and stood to leave, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending I had too many years left for that, but a circle closing, a melody returning to its root note before moving on to the next phrase. Samuel's legacy wasn't just the buildings he'd constructed or the company he'd built. It was the music he'd kept alive, the values he'd rediscovered, the son we'd created together who was finding his own balance between ambition and soul, and my legacy. It was still being written, one note at a time. What would you do if the person who broke your heart left you their legacy? Would you walk away or finally sit down at the piano? If this story touched you or made you think of someone from your past, take a moment to like this video, share it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories just like this one, real, raw, and honest, make sure to subscribe. You never know which story might echo something in your own life. Thanks for watching from Asheville.